Cha. Twist. Often your TV picture will go out before the sound does, preempting your show with an unwelcome cliff.
Humid in Nashville?
It's a little bit more humid, but not that much.
Because I remember the humidity being oppressive. Not as bad as like Boston. I'm sorry. Rob Walch is here with us, everybody. Rob Walch, he of, I don't even know, Podcast 411, of course, on Twitter. What do you do today in iOS now? Is that more your jam, or what show do you talk about more?
Today in iOS is my regular podcast, if you want to call it regular-ish. With the move this summer has been irregular.
Sure.
And then the feed with Elsie Escobar, which we talk about podcasting. But as far as the Mac world goes, it's today in iOS.
Okay. Boston in August. I remember being like the most like oppressive weather I've lived through. Because I've lived in like Oklahoma where it gets to 100 whatever, but it's a dry heat. You know, Southern California, it's a dry heat, although in Southern California, they're not used to such heat. And so then they say, listen, we're just going to turn off your power for a bit. It's not you, it's us. We just need to not have the whole grid go down. So in the heat of the day, we're going to shut you off there. I want to talk to you about the move to Nashville, but there's no time, Rob. Because right now, I want to talk about, if you'll spare me a minute or two, I want to talk about why I'm not doing video for this show right now. Do you mind?
Not at all.
Okay.
I heard all the issues you had last week, and sorry about that.
No, it's fine. It wasn't about that. I mean, because that, honestly, when I think about it, I believe it was a double tap. In fact, as you and I talk, I am moving my cursor away from the record button. Because I think what happened last week was I hit record, but then I just accidentally, and so I probably started it and stopped it. But it's not because of that I'm doing it. It's because I love this show. This show to me is a tremendous amount of fun. And I love the idea of doing video. Video to me is not a tremendous amount of fun. Video to me is a lot of stuff I'm not comfortable with. It's a lot of stuff that I worry about. It's constantly looking at the screen and seeing, how I look. Am I still in frame? Am I still in focus? Plus, anytime I try to record video straight to my Mac, which you have to do if you're having a conversation back and forth with somebody, right?
Yes.
My fan just it's almost like one of the helicarriers from one of the Avengers movie. My fan just takes off. And I even last week installed a Turbo Switch Boost or Turbo Boost Switch, whatever it's called. And that didn't do anything. I mean, it was still just fan going the whole time. I was getting laggy video. And really what it comes down to is, as much as I enjoyed the conversations with, Mike Rose and Adam Christensen and Allison Sheridan and Dave Hamilton, and I think there might have been one more video person in there, I'm not sure. As much as I've enjoyed those conversations, I haven't enjoyed them as much as when I just sit down at a mic and record and don't worry about all the ancillary stuff. So I like having stuff on YouTube. I intend to put stuff on YouTube. I intend to keep working on the video thing, but not with this show, because it turns out this show is, at heart, I don't want to say a radio show because it's not on the radio, but at heart, this is an audio show. And that's where my heart is for this show. And so as much fun as it was to, learn a little bit about video editing, and as much fun as it is to have something new on YouTube Monday through Friday, I would rather like the show I'm doing more than liking having the show someplace.
Well, I'm just glad you sent me the message saying we were only doing audio when you did, because I was like 5 minutes of going up and shaving. I was like, I got to go shave. I'll be on video.
Nice. Yeah, I'll tell you where it happened for me was I was rearranging the entire studio last night, partly in my head, partly in real life, and still knowing that I was going to end up with a video that I wasn't happy with. And it would have nothing to do with you, and it wouldn't even have to do with the conversation. It just has to do with the way I'm set up right now for this particular show. So honestly, this show may end up back as a video thing at some point.
Oh, so it's just me. Okay,
no.
Okay.
Oh no, it's not going to be for the next month or two at least. I don't think. Although, like I say, I do intend to try to play with some video stuff. But enough about me. One of the features that we do on this show, and I think it sounds like you know this, Rob, having watched and or listened to the show, is on Monday, I like to turn the show over to the guest, because I know there are things that interest me, but I don't necessarily, I know I don't know everything, and then I don't necessarily, know what's going to be interesting to you. And so we sit down right now and I say, it's news to Rob. And what is news to you, sir?
Well, I pre-warned you on this one. I sent you some screenshots. And this has to do with probably the most significant privacy feature added for podcast listeners. And it has to do with the Overcast app, not what Apple's doing, but the Overcast app in the next version. It's out in the beta right now. In the next version, it will allow you to see how your privacy is or is not being violated by the different podcasts you listen to.
All right, I'm going to stop you right there, because my feeling is, and this is weird and kind of embarrassing as long as I've been doing podcasting, except mostly what I focus on is my show. I tend to think of a podcast as somebody puts up an audio file. I can download that audio file and listen to it. I would think that my privacy concerns would be in whatever podcast aggregator I'm using. How is it divided up into different podcasts?
It has really nothing to do with the aggregators that you're using.
Really?
It has to do with the podcast you're listening to. And depending on the podcast, and this is one of the things this is like the dirty little secret that Apple doesn't want to talk about, people don't want to talk about in the podcast industry, but Marco is shining a light on this. I actually wrote an article about this a year ago.
Marco Arment, the developer of Overcast.
And Marco Arment is developer of Overcast and formerly Instapaper and Tumblr. So Marco, brilliant guy, but very privacy minded, and he is going to allow you now in the Overcast app to see if or if not your privacy is being violated. And good news is anyone that listens to any of your podcasts they're safe. I sent you screenshots from Mission Log and macOS Ken in the show.
I'm not on Mission Log anymore, right?
Okay, well,
no, just so you know.
Previously, yeah.
That's fine. Yeah. Good. I'm glad that, I've left people in good hands, accidentally, apparently.
But the point is the shows you've been involved with. So I went through and send off just quick shot on those. And my show today in iOS, you'll see as well. Mac Break Weekly, not so good. Vergecast, not so good. And there were some issues in there. And if you look in Mac Break Weekly and you look in Overcast now, you'll see that they use Chartable and Megaphone, and those have they have features where they track the listener and then basically they're stalking the listener is what it comes down to. And you might say, well, lots of stuff stalk you, but in podcasting, where it's really different than saying like visiting a website. It's like Vergecast. Vergecast stalks you as well. I sent you one on the Vergecast. And why it's different in podcasting is in podcasting, the listeners never have an option to opt in. And you don't have that option to opt in and say, yes, it's okay for you to track me and take my personal information and put me in a database and track me around the web. Which, okay, if you're listening to a podcast about Mac stuff, it's probably not that big a deal. But let's say you're listening to a podcast about mental health issues, and you really want to be in a database someplace that says this is a person that listens to 3 different podcasts on mental health issues. And scary enough, some of the podcasts about mental health issues do track the listeners.
Really?
Yes.
All right. Now, I can't imagine, though, that this is, which one was the first one you said? You said Mac Break Weekly?
Mac Break Weekly.
Yeah,
yes.
I can't imagine that Leo sat there and said, no, we're going to make this podcast, we're going to track people. Is this a function then of, because I can't imagine that his audio editor is sitting there and saying, okay, where are we going to put this code? Is it who they're signing up with to sell their ads?
It has to do around advertising, and some of the hosting services out there track the listeners, and they'll use different services that are known for tracking. Chartable and pod sites combined. That's what they do. It's called attribution, listener attribution. What really listener attribution is it's tracking of your listeners without your listeners having an option to opt in. That's what attribution in podcast listening means. So the news is Overcast is going to shine the light on this. And so there's going to be some people that are not going to be happy about this.
You think it's going to be anybody besides nerds? Because I'm thinking about, and forgive me, I'm not, and I'm a nerd. That does concern me. At the same time, I guess I'm kind of aware that this is happening, although to me it was sort of mystical, magical. I think I was listening to an NPR podcast, maybe, and there was an ad that was about some referendum that was coming up in my area. So at that point I was aware, okay, they know where I am. I think it was NPR. I can't remember. It's been a few months now. they know where I am with the they in quotes, because I don't know who the they is at that point. Like, is it the podcast shaking hands with the aggregator? Is it the podcast, using my location services? I mean, what is it that's doing that?
It's not the aggregator apps. And just want to clear this. When you're getting tracked, it's not the aggregator apps. So this is going to happen with, by the way, Apple's podcast app. So you're listening to Vergecast.
That's what I listened through. So that's why I kind of assumed that it was something tied into iOS.
Right. And Apple doesn't mention in iOS 14 in privacy the fact that Apple's own podcast app will allow these people to track you. So Apple kind of turns a blind eye to it, so to say.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's going to be very interesting. So if you have the beta version of Overcast, or when he updates to the next version, go in there and find the podcast that you listen to, and there's a little button that'll say privacy and privacy and tracking. If it's the tracking, tap on that and you'll be able to see. And you'll be able to see on the Vergecast, you're going to see a couple of yellow triangles, one for dynamic ad insertion, one for tracking. And you're going to see that the Vergecast uses pod sites and Chartable and Megaphone, which are all tracking you and passing your information around. And again, if you listen to the Vergecast, it's probably like, okay, it's not that big a deal. But what if it is a mental health issue podcast? What if you're listening to a cannabis podcast? And now you get into a database as a cannabis user and you go to apply to some job somewhere, and somewhere along the line that database was sold and you don't get a job and you don't know why. And you never knew that you were ever being tracked. Or even worse, you can take it to the extreme level and go, okay, what about an LGBTQ podcast? And you travel to Dubai and then you step off the plane with your partner and someone's following you because you're in a database have listened to multiple LGBTQ podcasts. So you can see where this can be a real world problem, and you can take it to many extremes. But the point of this is it's unethical, the tracking that's going on. And it's not every company, it's not every podcast, but there are some that are doing it. And because podcast listeners have no idea what's going on and no idea that there's no option to ever opt in, that's where it becomes a problem.